my friends are synths.
For today's video, I'm going to be talking to you a wee bit about the Arturia MiniFreak. This synthesizer, in many ways, is the natural evolution of one of Arturia's most beloved and innovative releases of the past few years. I'm, of course, talking about the MicroFreak, which you can see lurking over my shoulder here in the background. Effectively, Arturia have taken the heart and soul, or the core concept at least, of the MicroFreak, built upon that, expanded it with different features, and created this entirely new instrument. I was a big fan of the MicroFreak, and if you haven't seen my original video talking about that, then it's worth going to have a wee watch because there's lots of overlapping features between the two. However, the most obvious difference, of course, is the fact that the MicroFreak has got these touch-sensitive capacitive pads, whereas the MiniFreak has got a more traditional keyboard. But there are loads of other features in there that are different and might not be immediately obvious to the naked eye. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of that, explain what I think of it, and you can make up your own mind. Before we go on to the specific internal features of the device, let's take a look at the build quality and the kind of physical attributes. The first thing I have to say on that regard is that when I first received the MiniFreak in the post, I was really pleasantly surprised and impressed with just how solid it feels. Unlike the MicroFreak, which was all made of plastic, this thing has got a metal bottom, which gives it a real kind of heft and solidity, which the MicroFreak didn't have. Whereas that might have felt a wee bit, you know, kind of more like a toy, this is much more like a serious instrument. The bottom is made of metal, the sides are made of plastic as well as the top, but it isn't cheap crappy plastic. It's got a nice premium feel to it. All of the knobs and potentiometers and all that kind of thing just feel really tight and really well put together, and overall I'm really genuinely very pleased with it. The synthesizer does have this kind of unusual space age design, particularly in the way the keyboard is kind of set, and it looks a wee bit weird in pictures, at least it did to me, but when I saw it in person, it just looks brilliant, and as a kind of cohesive thing, it's very pleasing indeed. There are a couple of particular physical assets or attributes that are worth highlighting. The first is the keyboard itself. Now the keys are mini keys, they are not full-size keys, that is something that's common on devices like this, but the key bed feels particularly nice, at least to my fingers. Now I don't know whether it's a case of, you know, the resistance or the dampening or the springs or whatever that's in there, it just feels a lot better to use than some of the other mini keyboards that I've used on other synthesizers. Obviously that's going to be subjective, but yeah, I like it. It's worth saying that the keys are velocity sensitive, so you can use this as a controller as well, and it's also got aftertouch. The second feature that I want to highlight is the OLED display, because not only is it really bright and contrasty and sharp, it is also really useful in a contextual way, so when you're changing different parameters, you can actually see what's going on, and I love that about the MiniFreak. This is something that it's got in common with the MicroFreak, and I'm really glad that they retained it on here because it's brilliant. When it comes to connectivity, on the rear of the MiniFreak, I am very pleased to report that we have got 5-pin, full-sized DIN MIDI connections, not the wee mini jack ones, so I've got a big smile on my face today. We've got MIDI input, MIDI output, and also MIDI through, which is a nice touch. There is a USB connection in the back, and that is to allow you to use MIDI over USB, as well as to update various firmware releases, save your presets and all that kind of thing. Moving along, we've got a 1/4-inch jack input for sustain pedals. We've then got a trio of analog mini jack sync options with clock input, clock output, and also, very nicely indeed, a reset output. This is something that a lot of controllers kind of omit, but is actually really useful if you're going to be using a controller like this with your modular system, so you can make sure everything is all lined up and in one place. So yeah, really nicely done, Arturia, on that. Moving along, we've got an audio input. This is on a 1/4-inch jack, and this allows you to route various signals into the MiniFreak through its filters and effects and process it accordingly. For outputs, we've got two 1/4" jack mono outputs, which gives you a stereo output to make the most of the stereo effects that are in there, which we'll come on to talk about in a wee bit. We also have a 1/4" jack stereo headphone output. Power comes via a 12-volt DC wall connection. There's a power switch in the rear, and we also have a Kensington lock, which I'm really pleased to see because I think this is something that more gear manufacturers should include. If you're not familiar with the Kensington lock system, it effectively provides a way to secure your device to a table, a DJ booth, or a desk or something else via a kind of bike lock thing, and this helps stop or prevent opportunists from just coming along and lifting your gear when you go to the toilet or you're doing sound check or anything. So that's a really cool inclusion as well. Nice, thoughtful thing to add. Let's come on to talk a wee bit about the internal features and specifications of the MiniFreak. This is a 6-voice polyphonic synthesizer, which can be configured to playback in polyphonic mode, monophonic mode, unison mode, or paraphonic mode, which gives you access to a whole host of additional voices that all share the same envelope and filter and that kind of thing. In contrast, the MicroFreak only had a single voice polyphony, but which could be expanded up to 4 voices paraphonically. Overall, the important thing to note is that the MiniFreak has a greatly increased voice count over the MicroFreak. When it comes to the kind of detailed specifics of the voices, there is 1 envelope per voice, there is 1 cycling envelope per voice, which is quite interesting, and 2 LFOs per voice. The synthesis engines within the MiniFreak are digital. Some of them are based on the open source Mutable Instruments designs. Some of them have specifically been created by noise engineering for the MiniFreak or the MicroFreak. However, there are also polyphonic analog VCAs and filters in there, so it's kind of a hybrid digital analog synthesizer in that regard. One of the big criticisms of the MicroFreak was that there wasn't any effects included, because whilst the digital synthesis engines on their own sounded pretty good, they really came to life with a bit of reverb or chorus or delay or whatever. And so whilst it was a portable box in of itself, you also had to bring along a kind of multi-effects pedal or whatever to get the most out of it. And to Arturia's credit, they've obviously been listening, because included within the MiniFreak is the addition of an internal effects engine. There are 3 effect slots that you can load up concurrently, and there are 10 different types of effects to choose from, which is really quite nice to see. As I mentioned, there's a stereo output, so you do get stereo effects coming out. It's not just a mono output of these effects, which is good as well. Within the MiniFreak, there is space for 512 presets. There's something like 256 or thereabouts loaded by default, and you have plenty of space to add in your own, so loads of room to recall the different patches that you create or want to play about with. There are loads of different arpeggiator options, which you can also associate with a patch. There's a 64-step sequencer. 2 ribbon controllers down the left-hand side next to the keybed, which can be assigned to various parameters within the synthesizer using the very handy matrix module in the top left. One of the really cool things that Arturia have done with the MiniFreak is to release this companion VST, which is effectively a reproduction of the synthesizer in its entirety in digital form. Now, obviously the synthesizer is digital, so a lot of the synth is going to be exactly the same in the VST. However, the analog elements like the filter and the VCAs are emulated. The coolest part about this though is the fact that once you buy a MiniFreak, you get a license to use the VST without having to pay anything else, which is a really nice touch. Overall, I have to say I've been really impressed with the MiniFreak. It's got a lot of options and possibilities in there, particularly with the mod matrix, but also it's simple and straightforward enough that it doesn't take a lot of brain power to get in and kind of manipulate things and save them and move on. And I spent a good few hours when I first got this thing just playing around with different presets, manipulating the tom ribbit, saving sounds that I really liked, and to be honest, that kind of sound design isn't something that I'm usually interested in, so I think that's a really good and positive sign. It's worth saying that this is not an analog synthesizer. It is a hybrid digital synthesizer with some analog components. And so if you're looking for a particular analog sound, this is not really going to be the one for you, and you shouldn't buy it and then complain that it isn't an analog synth, because it's not. This synth does have its own particular digital character that I quite like, which sounds even better with the inclusion of the effects. Some of the effects in there I actually really like because of their digital nature, including the bit crush and the distortion. The aliasing just sounds really pleasing to me, and so overall it's got its own thing, and you have to be aware of that. I think it's fair to say that this isn't exactly a groundbreaking synthesizer like the MiniFreak kind of was. It is more building upon that legacy, and I think that's quite a smart thing to do, taking the core concept and the core kind of synth engines and building upon them for different use cases. I have to say that when I first heard about the MiniFreak, I wasn't exactly bowled over with anticipation because of this. You know, I really liked the MiniFreak and I didn't really see what they were going to do to make it more interesting for me, but they have actually succeeded, and the final package is an instrument in of its own right. It isn't just a repackaged MiniFreak with some additional bells and whistles, so, you know, credit to Arturia for that. My final conclusion on the MiniFreak is that it's a really versatile synthesizer that packs in a lot of features into quite a small and portable format, which is actually really good value for the money. I've been struggling to think of any alternatives for the MiniFreak other than the SM Hydrasynth Deluxe. However, that kind of takes quite a different approach to workflow and isn't as easy to dive into as the MiniFreak is. If you're looking to buy your first synthesizer, or somebody is asking you for advice on the type of synthesizer you would recommend for somebody starting out, then I think the MiniFreak would be hard to beat. Similarly, if you're somebody that's already got a MiniFreak and you love it, but you find yourself running up against some of the limitations, particularly around the polyphony and the lack of internal effects, then I do think that it is worth considering the MiniFreak as an additional purchase. So with that, that is all of my thoughts on the MiniFreak, the various features that I think are worth highlighting, and in particular how it compares to the MiniFreak. Thanks a lot to Arturia for sending it over for me to take a look at, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with next. For now, see you later.